Here is what almost nobody covering this situation is saying out loud. Forget the strike numbers. Forget the press briefings. Forget whatever headline just dropped. Strip everything back, and there is one question sitting underneath all of it that matters more than anything else being discussed right now. Can the United States actually get out of this? Not just militarily, not just politically. Can it negotiate a ceasefire? Can it pull back without burning down the architecture that keeps its own economy running? And the more carefully you examine the situation, the more uncomfortable the answer becomes. Because the answer, when you look at it honestly, is no. Washington is not steering this conflict. Washington is caught inside it. It cannot push forward. It cannot pull back. It is stuck. And today I want to walk you through exactly how that trap was built, step by step, in plain language, because understanding this is the most important thing anyone paying attention to global events right now can do. Let us get into it. The starting point, the thing you have to understand before anything else makes sense, is that once a confrontation of this scale gets moving, it stops responding to the people who set it in motion. It develops its own internal logic, its own pressure, its own direction. The leaders and planners who believed they were in control discover, usually too late, that the situation is actually controlling them. Look at Ukraine, February 2022. Within the first weeks, serious analysts on both sides understood that a negotiated resolution was possible. Both sides were absorbing enormous costs, lives, economic damage, infrastructure destruction. The human toll was staggering. And yet, years later, that confrontation is still grinding forward, still consuming both sides. Why? Because stopping means one side has to accept something deeply painful, terms that feel like humiliation, an outcome that looks like defeat, a concession so politically toxic that almost no government is willing to agree to it. And so it continues, not because continuing is the logical choice, because stopping at this point feels worse. What is happening in the Middle East is locked into exactly the same structure. Neither side will acknowledge defeat, even when the cost of continuing is clearly the worse option. This is not a guess. It is the consistent pattern from every major conflict of the last 100 years. But here is where the current situation becomes even harder to exit than Ukraine. Even if Washington decided right now, today, to pursue a negotiated resolution, it could not. Not mainly because the other side refuses to talk, but because the terms that would come back across the table would be more damaging to America than the confrontation itself. This is the negotiation trap, and it is the most important thing to understand about this entire situation. Picture this scenario. Washington reaches out through back channels tomorrow. Oman, Qatar, wherever the diplomatic line runs, the signal goes out. We are ready to talk. What comes back? The response is, fine. Here are the conditions. Condition 1. The United States pays Iran approximately $1 trillion in compensation. $1 trillion covering this conflict, the accumulated impact of decades of economic pressure, and the generational cost imposed on the Iranian population through sanctions. Condition 2. And this is the one that makes everything unravel. The United States leaves the Middle East permanently. Every forward operating position, every deployed force, every military presence in the region, gone forever, no return. Tehran's reasoning is not complicated. The only real security guarantee for Iran going forward is ensuring Washington can never launch this kind of operation again. Some people hear those terms and think, honestly, maybe America should leave the Middle East anyway. That thinking completely misses what actually happens the moment those forces depart. Because the instant American forces leave, a sequence begins. 5 stages, each one more damaging than the last. And together, they represent an outcome far worse than any military setback. Stage 1. The Gulf states realign toward Iran. Right now, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, and Bahrain function as independent governments because the American military presence underwrites their security. It is the reason they do not have to negotiate their survival with a larger neighbor. Remove that guarantee, and a simple question emerges. Who provides security now? The only regional power with the military capacity to control the Strait of Hormuz and project meaningful force across the Gulf is Iran. These governments have no practical alternative. They shift toward Tehran, not out of preference, Because the strategic reality gives them nowhere else to go. Stage 2. The petrodollar system breaks down. This is where it stops being a regional story and becomes a crisis for the American economy itself. The Gulf states are not simply energy exporters. They are the structural foundation of the petrodollar mechanism. And the petrodollar mechanism is not a financial abstraction. It is the system that allows the American economy to function at its current scale. Here is the plain version of how it works. Every barrel of oil Saudi Arabia exports, every cubic meter of gas Qatar ships, is priced and settled in US dollars. Every country that depends on Gulf energy, which is most of the world, has to hold US dollars to purchase it. That creates a permanent, structural global demand for American currency that would not otherwise exist. It is demand built into the architecture of global trade itself. And then those same Gulf states take the dollars they earn and recycle them back into American markets. They buy US government bonds. They invest in American financial instruments. They fund American debt. This recycling cycle is what allows a country carrying $39 trillion in debt to keep operating without a fiscal crisis. The moment the Gulf states move into Iran's orbit, that cycle ends. There is no longer any strategic reason to price energy in dollars, no obligation to recycle earnings back into American markets. The mechanism that has sustained American financial dominance for decades simply stops. And with $39 trillion in outstanding debt, that is not a manageable disruption. That is a structural collapse. Stage 3. Japan and South Korea start building independent military capacity. Both governments are watching this confrontation in real time. They are watching American power being tested in ways that were not supposed to be visible. And the question forming in Tokyo and Seoul is the obvious one. If Washington is struggling here, can it actually protect us from China, from North Korea? Can we still trust our entire national security to an alliance partner that is clearly overstretched? If America then withdraws from the Middle East entirely, that question becomes impossible to set aside. The logic is obvious. A government that exits one region when the pressure gets high is a government that might exit another. Japan, which has operated under strict post-war constraints on military spending since the end of World War II, is already discussing the most significant defense expansion in its modern history. An American withdrawal from the Middle East accelerates that process immediately and dramatically. What this means for Washington: two of its most important Pacific partners stop directing resources toward American military infrastructure and start building their own. Another serious blow to both the economic and strategic position of the United States. Stage 4. Europe recalculates on the Ukraine situation. Europe has been absorbing significant costs to stay aligned with Washington. Energy disruption, economic strain, refugee pressure, all of it sustained in support of a position that primarily serves American strategic objectives in the region. But if America withdraws from the Middle East, the calculation in European capitals changes quickly. If Washington is pulling back globally, if it is no longer the reliable anchor of the international order, why is Europe continuing to absorb these costs? The rational move becomes reaching a settlement with Moscow on whatever terms are available, as quickly as possible. The moment European governments move in that direction, the alliance architecture America built over 8 decades begins coming apart. The coherence of the broader Western Bloc dissolves. American strategic influence across Europe contracts sharply. Another foundational pillar, gone. Stage 5. The US dollar loses its position as the world's reserve currency. Put all of it together. The petrodollar gone. Pacific allies redirecting resources away from American infrastructure. European alignment fracturing. The combined signal to global markets is unmistakable. Nations stop treating US dollars as the essential global reserve. They stop absorbing American debt. The financial structure that allows $39 trillion in borrowing to remain sustainable collapses. And an economy built on the assumption that the world will always buy more American debt finds itself without that assumption. This is why Washington cannot leave. Staying is costly. Leaving is catastrophic. There is no comfortable position here. Every option has a serious price. The only question is, which price is least immediately devastating? So, if negotiation is a trap and withdrawal triggers a 5-stage economic collapse, the pressure builds toward doing something visible, something that looks decisive. something that projects strength in a way that changes the public narrative. Current reports indicate approximately 200 Marines are moving from Okinawa toward the region. There is also an unconfirmed report suggesting the target could be Karg Island. Karg Island is where Iran processes and exports approximately 90% of its oil. It is the economic center of gravity for Iran's entire operation. On paper, the logic looks compelling. Deploy to the island, cut Iran's revenue, force a resolution through economic pressure, visible, decisive, strong imagery. But the logic collapses the moment you look at the actual geography. You can reach Karg Island. Holding it is an entirely different challenge. The island sits close to the Iranian coastline. The moment American forces land, Iranian artillery, precision drones, and munitions begin striking the position continuously. The island becomes untenable. To protect the forces there, you have to neutralize the launch positions on the coast. Now, American forces are operating on Iranian territory, but the coastline sits beneath the Zagros Mountains. Iranian positions in the high ground begin targeting the coastal deployment. To neutralize that threat, you push into the mountains. And once you are inside the Zagros, you are not running a limited operation anymore. You are conducting a ground campaign inside one of the most geographically complex countries on Earth. This is how it always begins. In 1965, 3,000 Marines arrived in Da Nang, Vietnam. One defined objective, a contained mission. Within a few years, America had 500,000 troops deployed. 3,000 became 500,000. A limited commitment became the defining catastrophe of a generation. Once you commit at scale, stepping back means acknowledging that every life spent, every dollar deployed, every political decision made was wrong. That accumulated cost becomes an anchor. You keep going not because forward progress makes strategic sense, but because stopping means confronting everything that was already lost. That is the sunk cost dynamic. It destroyed the Vietnam engagement. Versions of it drove the decisions in Iraq and Afghanistan. The same structure is forming right now. Here is the part that almost no mainstream coverage is addressing directly. American military leadership does not want this confrontation, not because of any deficit in capability or commitment in the ranks, but because the strategic simulations have been run. Repeatedly. Every major scenario, every force configuration. The result is consistent. In a full-scale confrontation with Iran, the outcome goes the wrong way for the American side. American military power was built for a specific operating model. Establish air superiority quickly. Use precision capability to dismantle an opponent's defensive infrastructure within days. Advance from a position of complete dominance. That model produced results in Iraq in 2003. Air superiority established in days. Baghdad reached in weeks. The government dismantled in under a month. Fast, clean, decisive. Iran has been studying that model for over 20 years. Every campaign, every tactic, every identifiable weakness in the approach. Tehran built its entire defense posture specifically to defeat it. Iranian forces do not mass in formations that are vulnerable to American air power. They disperse. They go underground. They operate through decentralized networks across the region. They use drones and hypersonic munitions calibrated precisely to exploit the specific gaps in American force projection. The most visible example of this is the USS Abraham Lincoln and the USS Gerald Ford, two of the most capable naval vessels ever constructed. Enough combined capability to reshape a small country, and both of them are positioned well outside the range of Iranian munitions, projecting presence from a distance, not projecting decisive operational power at close range. Because entering Iranian strike range means risking a carrier, and losing a carrier would represent one of the most significant strategic and psychological shocks in American military history. Tehran knows this. Tehran designed its entire operational posture around this specific constraint. The carrier groups hold their distance, exactly as Iran planned. Given everything above, a negotiated resolution is a trap. Withdrawal triggers a 5-stage economic collapse. Ground deployment leads to unlimited escalation. Strategic simulations consistently produce the wrong outcome. What should Washington actually do? The answer requires pulling back from the immediate situation and looking at the larger structural picture. This confrontation does not exist in isolation. It connects directly to the economic standoff with China, the ongoing situation in Ukraine, and the rising pressure across Asia. These are not separate events happening in separate boxes. They are all expressions of the same underlying condition. American strategic reach is overextended. By maintaining a significant presence in every major region simultaneously, Washington has given its rivals an endless supply of pressure points. They can provoke. They can escalate in one theater to drain resources and attention from another. They can force commitments that cost far more than they generate in strategic value. That is the dynamic running across every major flashpoint right now. The only path that does not end in serious degradation of American power is a fundamental reorientation of approach, not domination through force, genuine partnership. Washington needs to sit across the table from Moscow, Beijing, Tehran, and the other major powers and acknowledge something it has resisted acknowledging. The era of a single dominant power setting the terms for the rest of the world is over. What replaces it has to be a structure where every major player has a real stake in stability, where every government has enough of what it needs that open confrontation stops being the rational calculation. In practical terms, that means America stops maintaining forward positions in 80 countries. It means America stops using its currency as a routine pressure instrument against governments it disagrees with. It means America comes to the table and says, everyone here has interests, everyone here has populations depending on good outcomes, and there is a version of this world where the architecture of cooperation serves everyone better than the current cycle of escalation and attrition. That is not weakness. That is exactly the kind of strategic discipline that preserves power over decades, rather than burning through it in a series of confrontations that cannot be won cleanly. Whether Washington has the clarity and political discipline to make that shift is the most consequential question of this moment. The honest answer is, I do not know. But here is what I do know. Every day this continues without that shift, the eventual cost of making it rises. For America, for Iran, for everyone whose future is connected to what happens next. Let us bring it all back together. Conflicts build their own momentum. As Ukraine showed us, once a confrontation is running at this scale, stopping it requires one side to absorb something politically and psychologically unbearable. Neither side does that easily. Washington cannot accept a negotiated ceasefire because the terms demanded would trigger a 5-stage chain reaction. Gulf states shift into Iran's orbit. The petrodollar system collapses. Japan and South Korea build independent military capacity. Europe settles with Moscow. The US dollar loses its global reserve position. An economy carrying $39 trillion in debt cannot survive that sequence. Washington cannot commit ground forces because Karg Island leads to the coastline leads to the Zagros Mountains, and the Zagros Mountains lead to an open-ended ground campaign. 3,000 becomes 500,000, the same trajectory that consumed America in Vietnam. Washington cannot achieve a decisive outcome through military means because the strategic simulations say so every single time, and because Tehran has spent over 20 years building the precise counter to everything the American military does. America is in a trap. No clear path forward, no clean exit, no stable holding position over time. The only way through that avoids catastrophe is a genuine reorientation, not domination, cooperation, leadership through partnership rather than pressure. When that happens, if it ever happens, only time will tell. Subscribe if this is the kind of analysis you want. And put your answer in the comments. Does Washington find a way out of this, or does it become the next conflict that runs for years without resolution? We will see you next time.